If you grew up in California in the 1960s, there are certain memories that don't fade, no matter how many decades pile up between then and now. The smell of burger grease on warm asphalt, the sound of a tray sliding down a chrome rail, the clink of a ceramic coffee cup being set down in front of you by a waitress who knew your name, your order, and probably your mother's too. Dining out in 1960s California wasn't just something you did when you didn't feel like cooking. It was an event. It was a ritual. It was one of the great pleasures of being alive in the most optimistic, sun-soaked, forward-looking state in America. And if you lived it, if you were there, then what you're about to hear isn't just history, it's memory. Today we're going back, all the way back to a California that no longer exists, to the restaurants, the food, the prices, and the whole magnificent neon-lit, chrome-polished experience of dining out in the Golden State during one of the most extraordinary decades in American life. To understand what dining out meant in 1960s California, you have to understand what California was in the 1960s. The war was a generation behind you, the economy was booming, young families were pouring into the suburbs, new freeways were being carved through the landscape like promises, and the automobile, that gleaming symbol of American freedom, was everywhere. California, more than any other state, had built its entire identity around the car, and the car, more than anything else, had shaped the way Californians ate. You didn't just drive to dinner, you sometimes drove for dinner. The open road, a tank of cheap gas, and a destination, that was a Saturday evening well spent. Americans were also getting wealthier. The middle class was expanding, and with more money in their pockets and more leisure time on their hands, Californians discovered something wonderful. They could afford to eat out, not just on special occasions, regularly. And California, with its year-round warmth, its restless creativity, and its peculiar genius for spectacle, was ready to give them somewhere extraordinary to go. If you lived in California in the 1960s, you had a coffee shop. Maybe you called it your coffee shop. Maybe it was the one on the corner 2 blocks from your house, or the one just off the freeway exit where you always stopped on Sunday mornings. These places were everywhere, and they were unlike anything the rest of the country had seen. Southern California had given birth to something called googie architecture, wild, angular roof lines that shot up toward the sky, plate glass windows that wrapped around corners, boomerang shapes and starbursts, and neon signs and colors that practically hummed with electricity.
Walk into one of these places, and the first thing you noticed was the shine. Chrome everywhere, countertops that gleamed, floors that sparkled. The cooking area was right there in front of you, open, theatrical, almost like a show. And the coffee shops weren't shy about their hours. Many of them were open all night. In an era before the 24-hour world we live in now, that felt almost radical. You could walk in at 2 in the morning and a waitress would top off your coffee without blinking. Denny's, yes, that Denny's, was born in California. It began as a simple donut stand in Lakewood in 1953, before expanding into the coffee shop format that would define it. By the 1960s, it was spreading up and down the state. And then there was Norm's. Founded right here in California, Norm's coffee shops became an institution from Los Angeles down through the valleys and suburbs, the kind of place where a cup of coffee cost a dime, where the pie was always fresh, and where nobody ever made you feel rushed. You could sit at the counter for hours, read your newspaper, talk to the man next to you about the Dodgers, and nobody would ask you to leave. That in itself felt like a luxury. But if the coffee shop was California's second living room, the drive-in was its front porch. At a time when the car was more than just transportation, when it was identity, freedom, and status all rolled into 4 wheels and a chrome grill, the drive-in restaurant made perfect sense. You didn't park and go inside. You were inside. You pulled in, flashed your headlights, and within moments a car hop appeared at your window. And not just any server, a car hop, in a uniform,
often on roller skates. These young women, and they were mostly young women by the 1960s, glided between cars with trays balanced on their arms and smiles that could light up a parking lot. They'd hook that tray right onto your car window, hand you your burger and your root beer float, and you'd eat with your family while the radio played and the California evening settled warm and orange around you. At the great Los Angeles drive-ins, there were over 200 in the greater LA area alone at the peak of the craze. Over 200! You could practically walk from one to the next. The menus were simple, and deliberately so. Burgers, hot dogs, fries, onion rings, malts, root beer, sometimes a fish sandwich or a chicken plate. Prices that anyone could manage. The drive-in was also the great teenage equalizer. It was where you went after the football game, where you sat with your girl or your guy, radio turned low, and the whole future seemed as wide and warm as the California sky above you. But here's what most people don't remember. By the mid-1960s, the car hops were already starting to disappear. A new concept was taking hold, one that didn't require a roller skating teenager or a window tray. The drive-thru was coming, and with it, something irreplaceable was quietly being lost. The drive-in asked you to slow down, to sit still, to stay a while. The drive-thru told you to keep moving. California, which had always been in a hurry, chose to keep moving.
You can't talk about 1960s California dining without talking about McDonald's. Because McDonald's didn't just come from California, it was made by California. The original McDonald's was a small drive-in hamburger stand in San Bernardino, opened by brothers Mac and Dick McDonald in 1940. They reinvented it in 1948, firing the car hops, stripping the menu down to 9 items, and building something they called the Speedy Service System. Burgers hot and ready in seconds. No waiting, no tipping, no fuss. A hamburger for 15 cents, a bag of fries for 10 cents, a milkshake for 20 cents. You could feed a family of 4 for under $2. Ray Kroc saw it. He franchised it, and through the 1960s, the Golden Arches went up across California, and then across the country, and then across the world, at a pace that seemed almost impossible. The company went public in 1965. In 1968, the Big Mac arrived on the national menu, priced at 45 cents. Expensive for fast food at the time, but quickly becoming the most popular item they had. What McDonald's did was remarkable, but what it replaced is the thing worth mourning. Because before the Golden Arches, before the drive-thru, before the standardized logo and the identical menu from Sacramento to San Diego, before all of that, every town in California had its own burger joint, its own local drive-in, its own version of a 15-cent hamburger made by somebody's uncle who'd been behind that grill for 30 years. Those places had names you could only know if you lived there. They had regulars, they had history, and one by one, quietly and then all at once, they closed. If you ever found yourself in downtown Los Angeles in the 1960s, really in downtown Los Angeles, walking the old Broadway corridor with its theaters and its noise and its life, there was one place you simply had to experience: Clifton's Cafeteria. From the outside, it looked like a building. From the inside, it looked like a forest. Clifton's Brookdale, the last survivor of what had once been a chain of 8 restaurants built by a man named Clifford Clinton, was decorated to look like a California redwood grove. 20-foot waterfalls, a quiet stream that meandered through the dining room, faux redwood trees concealing the room's steel columns, a stuffed moose head, an animated raccoon perched in the branches, and murals covering the walls, life-size forests on canvas, painted by one of the great Los Angeles muralists of the era. It was, and there's really no other word for it, fantastical. You'd pick up your tray and slide it down the line. Roast beef, brisket, meatloaf, turkey carved fresh, mashed potatoes piled high, Jell-O salads in colors that don't exist in nature, pies and cakes and puddings at the far end, where you'd often stop just to stare before choosing.
The prices were almost impossibly low. Clinton had built his restaurants on a philosophy he called the Golden Rule, and his motto was, "Dine free unless delighted." A sign on the wall invited guests to pay what they wished. In the Depression years, thousands had eaten for free without shame. By the 1960s, the prices were still modest enough that anyone could afford to sit down. That was Clifton's great gift to Los Angeles. It was a place without hierarchy. Factory workers and film producers, pensioners and politicians, families just scraping by, and tourists from across the country. They all picked up the same tray, stood in the same line, and sat under the same impossible redwood trees. Jack Kerouac ate there. Ray Bradbury held court there. The Los Angeles Science Fiction League, which would go on to shape the entire genre, was born in one of its booths. By the late 1960s and into the 1970s, downtown Los Angeles began its long, slow decline. Foot traffic thinned. The theaters went dark. Clifton's hung on, as it always had, but the world around it was changing. The cafeteria finally closed in 2011 after 74 years of service. The waterfall went still, the redwood trees fell silent, and another irreplaceable piece of California was gone. There was a different kind of escape on offer in 1960s California, one that didn't take you into a California forest, but somewhere far more exotic, somewhere you'd never actually been, but somehow always wanted to go. Trader Vic's. Victor Bergeron, Trader Vic, had started with a small bar in Oakland back in 1934. By the 1960s, his restaurants had become something extraordinary, fully realized fantasy worlds, wrapped in tapa cloth and carved tiki gods, hung with fishnets and outrigger canoes, glowing with torches and the soft amber light of a place designed to make you forget wherever you'd come from. The minute you walked through that door, you weren't in California anymore. You were somewhere in a mythical Polynesia that had never quite existed in the real world and didn't need to. The whole point, as Vic himself might have told you with a roar of laughter, was the escape. The drinks came first, and they came in abundance. The Mai Tai, which Trader Vic claimed to have invented in 1944, handing one to a friend from Tahiti who exclaimed, "Mai Tai Roa Ae, out of this world, the best," was the signature. But there was also the Fog Cutter, the Scorpion Bowl shared by two across a table, a bowl big enough to drown your worries in. Rum was the hallmark, and rum, in quantities that Trader Vic encouraged, had a way of making even the stainless steel suburbs of California feel like a tropical adventure. The food leaned Cantonese, dishes adapted and reimagined for American palates. Spare ribs roasted in a Chinese oven that became the restaurant's signature. Crab rangoon, which Trader Vic's is widely credited with inventing. Exotic preparations involving pineapple and ginger and coconut, presented with names that sounded like they'd been lifted from a Bali travel brochure. It was, by any strict definition, inauthentic. Vic knew it, his customers knew it. Nobody cared, because what Trader Vic's offered wasn't authenticity, it was joy. By the mid-1970s, younger diners had moved on. The tiki dream faded. Locations closed. The original Oakland restaurant shut its doors in 1972. The one in the Beverly Hilton eventually went dark too. What was left, what remains, if you know where to look, is a memory of a California that believed in the power of a good drink and a beautiful illusion to make an ordinary Tuesday evening feel like paradise.
Not every night out in 1960s California was casual. Not every meal was eaten in a booth under neon lights. Because California also had another world entirely. A world of white tablecloths, candlelight,
career waiters in tuxedos, and menus in French. In San Francisco, Fior d'Italia, which would go on to claim the title of America's oldest Italian restaurant, held court in North Beach. White tablecloths, tableside service, the classic veal saltimbocca. Photos of Frank Sinatra and Joe DiMaggio lined the walls because Frank Sinatra and Joe DiMaggio had actually been there. Sam's Grill, down in the financial district, offered private, curtained booths where the city's power brokers had been making deals since the gold rush. Their seafood recipes, sole meuniere, crab cioppino, petrale caught fresh from the bay, hadn't changed in decades and didn't need to. In Los Angeles, the Supper Club was an institution unto itself. The Coconut Grove inside the Ambassador Hotel on Wilshire Boulevard had been the social center of Hollywood glamour since the 1920s. By the 1960s, it was still the place where you brought someone you wanted to impress, where you dressed up, where you ordered the surf and turf. Yes, surf and turf was a California invention. A Van Nuys restaurant paired a steak with a lobster tail in 1964 for $3, and the combination spread across the country within years. Middle-class Californians suddenly found themselves eating lobster on a Tuesday. The fine dining experience of 1960s California was rooted in a kind of democratic aspiration that feels uniquely American. You didn't have to be wealthy to sit at a white tablecloth table. You just had to save up a little. And people did. Anniversaries were celebrated. Promotions were toasted. First dates were conducted with a solemnity that would feel almost comical today. Getting dressed up for dinner meant something. The ritual of it, the choosing of what to wear, the making of the reservation, the parking the car and walking through the door was part of the pleasure. Dinner wasn't fuel. Dinner was an occasion. So what were you actually eating in 1960s California? The answer depends on where you were eating and who you were. At your neighborhood coffee shop, you were eating a Denver omelet or a short stack of buttermilk pancakes, a patty melt on rye bread with grilled onions, a bowl of chili served with crackers and a glass of cold milk, a slice of pie, apple, cherry, or banana cream under a glass dome on the counter.
At the drive-in, you were eating a cheeseburger with everything and a chocolate malt thick enough that the straw stood straight up in it. You ate it in your car with a napkin on your lap while a radio played something by the Beach Boys. At Trader Vic's, you were having the spare ribs in your second Mai Tai, maybe your third. At a California supper club, you were starting with a shrimp cocktail, pink, cold, served in a glass with a little cup of red sauce. Then a wedge salad with Roquefort dressing. Then a filet mignon, medium rare, with a baked potato the size of a small planet, loaded with sour cream and chives and a pat of butter that melted slow and golden across the top. California cuisine in the 1960s was generous. It was not subtle. Portions were large because large portions were a sign of abundance, and abundance was what California was selling. The idea that you might leave a restaurant still hungry was almost offensive. There was also the great Polynesian-influenced craze that ran through the entire decade. Pineapple appearing in places it had no business being, sweet and sour sauces, teriyaki, coconut. California was always looking outward, always absorbing what the world around it had to offer, always making it its own. And the coffee was always there, always ready, always free-flowing. The restaurants of 1960s California weren't just about the food, they were about the people. Teenagers claimed the drive-ins and the coffee shop booths like territory. After school, after the game, on Friday nights, the booths filled up with kids who'd pooled their quarters for a shared order of fries and a jukebox song. Families gathered for Sunday dinner at places where everyone, grandparents to grandchildren, could find something on the menu. The coffee shop was democratic that way. A 3-year-old could be happy with a grilled cheese, grandma could have her pot roast, dad could have the patty melt, mom could have whatever she wanted because she always had the soup.
For working men and women, lunch was often taken at the counter, fast, filling, affordable. The stool next to you might be occupied by a carpenter or a studio executive, and in California in the 1960s, that proximity was part of the appeal. This was a state that believed, perhaps naively but sincerely, in a certain equality of the table. There were, of course, inequalities that the restaurant world reflected too. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 had finally, legally ended the discrimination that had excluded black diners from countless restaurants across the country. In California, formal segregation in dining rooms had been less explicit than in the South, but the hostile receptions, the bad tables, the deliberate poor service, those were real. The Act's passage was a moment of reckoning, not just nationally, but right here in the Golden State. By the middle of the decade, the culture itself was shifting. The summer of love was coming. The counterculture was gathering in San Francisco. Young people who might once have ordered a malt at the drive-in were now eating in ways their parents found peculiar. Natural foods, communal tables, vegetarian options in places that hadn't existed before. California, as always, was changing. Even as you were eating, the world around the table was being remade.
And so we come to the part that's harder to talk about. Because the 1960s were the last decade before everything changed. The drive-ins gave way to drive-thrus, faster, cheaper, but without anyone's name on the tray. The neighborhood coffee shop gave way to national chains that looked the same in Sacramento as they did in Cincinnati. The supper club, with its tableside service and its carefully dressed waitstaff, became a special occasion place, and then, for most people, became a memory. Clifton's cafeteria in Los Angeles, which had fed thousands through the Depression, through the war, through decades of boom and struggle, it finally closed its cafeteria doors in 2011, after 74 years. The waterfall stopped. The faux redwood trees were dismantled. The charming sign that had read, "Dine free unless delighted," gone. Trader Vic's, which had once operated 25 locations worldwide in its heyday, watched most of them close as the tiki dream faded. The original Oakland restaurant that had started it all shut in 1972. The Beverly Hills location, where a generation of Californians had drunk their first Mai Tai, eventually went dark. The great Googie coffee shops, with their swooping rooflines and their all-night neon glow, most of them fell to the bulldozer. The architecture that had once defined the California roadscape was declared garish, old-fashioned, a relic, and so it was demolished. What replaced it all is faster, more convenient, more consistent. You'll never be surprised, and you'll never be disappointed, and you'll never sit somewhere for 3 hours because nobody asked you to leave. You'll also never feel the particular thrill of pulling into a parking lot and having someone skate out to your window. You'll never stand in a redwood forest in the middle of downtown Los Angeles and slide your tray past a bowl of Jell-O salad that somehow, impossibly, seems exactly right. You'll never sip a drink out of a carved tiki mug in a dark room full of fishnets and torchlight and feel, just for a moment, like you've escaped the whole world. A few of them, just a few, are still there, still open, still serving. If you've never been, go. If you haven't been in years, go back. Sit down, order something, let the room remind you. Because here is what the restaurants of 1960s California understood, and what we have mostly forgotten. A meal isn't just food, it's time, it's place, it's the people across the table from you. It's a moment you'll carry for the rest of your life, without even knowing you're carrying it, until one day something, a smell, a sound, the particular warmth of afternoon light through a diner window, brings it all back. That's what they gave you, those restaurants. That's what California gave you. And even now, even after all of it is gone, it isn't really gone. Not as long as you remember it.